Welcome to Adapted, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is
Pat
and KJ.
Today we'll be discussing The Three-Body Problem from 2008 and its adaptation, Three-Body Problem, from 2024.
And Tom, before we begin, I just want to throw the spoiler scope out there. We will be doing spoilers for the first book, the Netflix series, and then I guess also the Tencent series, which was released in China. So audience, heads up, even our intro here is going to include those.
So the three-body problem is a Chinese phenomenon from the author Lu Xinshu. I think I'm saying that correctly. And it follows a collection of scientists or a group of scientists around the world who've been committing suicide once their particle accelerators have stopped working, stopped making accurate predictions. In the book, we follow a nanoscientist who is making nanofibers and a detective, Dasha, who, as they try to investigate what is happening. As it goes along, it seems like what's behind the suicides is a secret organization, and behind the secret organization is aliens, and they are recruiting people, possibly using a video game, but we're not entirely sure. But there definitely does seem to be aliens coming, and in the end, we learn we are all bugs. So I think we could, if need be, forego with our normal questions that we ask and kind of jump into this. It seems to be from our text messaging that we were not huge fans of the book or the adaptation. I can speak for myself. I get the impression, Pat, that is how you felt. I feel like, KJ, you could speak for yourself, but didn't like the book, kind of like the Netflix show. So let's start there with, what did you guys think of the book? What did you find it to be intriguing? What in it did you find intriguing? What were some difficulties with it?
So I guess I'll start by saying I'm not a big sci-fi guy. I've read a few sci-fi books, but I'm more of a adventure. Give me a Star Wars, not a Star Trek. I need the emotional side, not just the intellectual side. So as far as sci-fi goes, I did like Three-Body Problem. It just took me longer to get through. It was harder to pick up than more of an adventure book than a sci-fi book. So I did enjoy it that way. One thing I do like about sci-fi books is they make you think. And certainly the turkey scientists, which is highlighted a lot in the Tencent.
It's highlighted a lot in the
in
10-cent.
the 10-cent version, yeah.
It has the great line, "I am a turkey scientist," which is said many times in dead seriousness.
And audience that needs a refresher because they skipped it in the Netflix show. It's just the idea if there was turkeys and they were scientists and every day the farmer came in and fed them at 10 o'clock, finally a scientist would say, hey, we get fed every day at 10 o'clock. But then on Thanksgiving morning, they all get slaughtered. So the scientist was wrong. So we, as human scientists, how do we know we're not just in a situation where we're being fed every day at 10 o'clock and don't know about the Thanksgiving that might be coming?
If you've read David Hume, you've pretty much got it. But yes, that's the turkey situation.
Isn't that Time Machine? Isn't that
the H.G. Wells?
Yeah, isn't that H.G. Wells?
I haven't read it, actually. I haven't read Time Machine.
Yeah, it's the same general.
Same general idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I also struggle with science fiction. I did some prep for this. I've not read a lot of science fiction in my life, but it seems to be with hard science fiction, and I think Three-Body, the book, the trilogy, especially the first book, falls into the hard science fiction category, which is the author attempts to explain the science. There can be some hand-waving, and it doesn't necessarily have to be realistic, but the author does attempt to give some sort of grounding to the science. And in this, for example, you could see with the Trisolarans when they're traveling, there's a long explanation as to why, even though they can travel 10% the speed of light, it actually takes 450 years because there's this slowdown process and that things like that. A lot of detail about the science. I've been reading the Red Mars trilogy, the Mars trilogy, which also does this. There's a lot of like, here's an explanation as to why the soil is exactly like this. And somebody jumps out and gives you an explanation. They give you a textbook scientific explanation as to X, Y, or Z. And that, I guess, is in contrast to soft science fiction, where No one cares. The lightsaber works because it's cool looking, and just let them fight. And I find problems with hard science fiction, and in the sense that very often I'm just having people explain science to me, and character takes a backseat to that. With soft science fiction, often it's sort of a space opera type thing where you have archetypes more than characters, and often that kind of is frustrating. It's why I find the Star Wars franchise very frustrating. It's sometimes interesting with those archetypes, very often it can be quite dull. And I think this falls into, especially the book falls into, some fairly two-dimensional characters explaining to me how quantum theory works, or how nanofibers work, or how 11-dimensional space-time works, and then we move on. The main character, the nanoscientist, he's pretty uninteresting. I mean, he's just a normal guy with a kid who is apparently a pretty decent amateur photographer. That's about it. That's what we get from him, because he's there to sort of explain the science, and he's with the detective because the detective doesn't know science, so he can explain things to him, and that gets a little frustrating after a while.
I had texted and said, "I don't think I can finish this book on time." And then I said, "That's not true. Just remove the on time. I don't think I can finish this book." And I couldn't. I just couldn't. Um, I don't know, and I tried to think about why I didn't like it. I think, Tom, your observation about character is probably the one of the things that I liked the least about it. Because yeah, there's essentially the only character that I thought was really interesting was the detective in the book. I actually did like him. He seemed kind of fun. He seemed to have, character traits and, things that he did that made sense. So I liked him. I just, yeah, the nanofiber guy, I'm like, I don't get it. Not he hasn't done anything. Like, why is this? It made no sense. Half of it. It was just boring. I didn't care what he was doing. The game made no sense whatsoever because it wasn't a game. It was like it wasn't even a walking simulator. Like, it wasn't anything. It made no sense really. I also did not understand how. I mean, there's plot holes I don't want to get too much into, but I don't understand how physicists could could have a game called Three Body and not figure out that there were three suns. Like, how is the how did you not get that from the minute you started and played this game for 30 seconds? Like, it was painfully obvious. And I'm not a scientist.
And that was the best way to explain it to the scientist? This elaborate VR? Like, a dossier probably would have been fine. Right? Here's
Yes.
how it works on this planet. Maybe
Yeah.
you wouldn't have had the
Yeah.
emotional attachment, but very strange and over elaborate way to explain it. Although, I guess for the audience, it would have been boring to watch the characters read us a dossier on how.
No, I would have been fine with that.
Could have just done it, or
It would
make
have just been over. No, but a dossier on on the three body problem would have been better than this nonsense. But so the book did bother me, and I mean, I had to think about it because I wasn't sure as I read. Because I should also say I actually quite enjoyed though the parts that took place in the Cultural Revolution, and I actually kind of enjoyed even the
I
I
agree.
liked. There's a number of sort of nice little details that I enjoyed about her being at the radio station. There's a great little detail about how all the people there don't want to be assigned there, but they also can't like slack off, although they might get like thrown into a prison camp. So they all just work really hard, but they just pretend they have no idea what they're doing. And so
Yeah.
if they're told to, I think she says, if they're told to go east, they very, very diligently go west until basically their superiors are like, well, they're working really, really hard, but they just seem in over their heads. So we'll assign them somewhere else because nobody wants to be working on this radio. But things like that, I'm like, That's like a good character. You know, you've created a nice world. Like I can understand this radio satellite or this radio station world. Like I understood what was going on there. I kind of enjoyed that. I understood her character. The other guy I really liked was the tree guy, which they massacred him in the series, the Netflix series. But I liked the guy that she meets who loves the trees and gives her the silent spring. Like there were a couple good characters, and there's a couple that sequence in particular is well written and fairly interesting. And I don't know if it's just because in the future he sort of is like, well, I can rely on the fact that I'm making this cool technology stuff. So I don't need, and I've got a cool scenario. So I don't need character and I don't need atmosphere and I don't need anything. Even the other moment I really actually kind of liked is when, it almost had like a noir-esque kind of feel when he was like wandering around the city one night and the detective, he meets up with the detective and they're like, yeah, there was some moments that were interesting, but the vast majority of it, it wasn't just dull, it was like fundamentally grating to read. That's why I think I would enjoy the dossier. Yeah, it's dull, but it wouldn't have irritated me.
Yeah.
Wait till we get to the series, it gets worse.
Yeah.
Maybe it gets worse.
Yeah. Well, the best part of it is the Cultural Revolution stuff. I think that's the only time he's doing something kind of literary, and especially how it's sort of mirroring in the peaceful Trisolaran, the pacifist Trisolaran, who's also sort of mirroring her actions as a betrayer. That works, and yeah, that little world works well. But there's weird ways he abandons characters that potentially could be interesting, like Evans, the bird guy, who's not a very interesting character when we meet him as the bird guy, but apparently over time he becomes like the leader of a death cult. And wouldn't it be interesting to meet that man as he was becoming the leader of a death cult or after he had become a leader of a death cult? All we hear about is after the nanofibers go through the boat is they're like, well, what happened to Evans? Oh, he's dead. And then we just move on. We never get his transformation. So the most interesting thing about him, we get nothing. And the least interesting thing that he really loves this particular type of swallow is there's a bit of that we get. So there's this misunderstanding of what is interesting in a character. And he's just so focused on the author is so focused on setting up all of these pieces, I think, and or loading all of these guns, to use the Chekhov's gun metaphor, that he wants to fire in the next two books. And I won't ruin the next two books, but that seems to be what's going on. He's creating like this sort of prologue that he can then rely on later. But the problem is it's a book, it's a book unto itself. It's a few hundred pages. And yeah, it is frustrating to read, even though he seems to be sometimes playing with themes that could potentially be interesting. So, which brings us, I think, to the adaptation. And I like this is a quote from KJ, who he sent us about. Which show did you send this about? I'll ask you after I read the quote.
Okay.
But it was, it's one of those shows I enjoyed more if I enjoyed it.
That had to be the Tencent one.
That had to be the Tencent
Yeah.
one? Okay. So it was adapted into a 30-part show in China, which I watched most of, and pretty faithfully. And then it was adapted by Netflix, by the same creators who made Song of Ice and Fire into Game of Thrones, which is trying to deal with, I think, a problem of character by basically bringing in all of the main characters from the three books and making them into friends who, for some reason, live in England, and then having them, because they're friends, build characters out of that. And then, yeah, a lot of the plot concepts, a lot of the conceits are the same. They really conserve many of the conceits. Unfortunately, they conserve the Cultural Revolution stuff as well. But that seems to be the big difference with the show, is that you have brand new characters who are drawn from all three of the books, and they introduce plot elements from all three books in this first one, even though it's from beginning to end, only following the major plot points of the first book.
So let's talk about these Friends a little bit. And I want to make a
Yeah.
comparison to the show Friends. So after that first episode, my first thought was, this show suffers from something that Friends doesn't suffer from. I think it's what makes the show Friends wonderful. In Friends, you have the 6 people, and there's no way they could hold down jobs because they're always hanging out. There's no way they could do anything besides
Yeah.
hang out. It doesn't make sense. And I felt like in the Netflix 3-Body Problem show, same problem. They're all hanging out. Nobody's stressed about work. They've started their own companies, their own things. Nobody has any kind of gray hair or like terrible all-nighters trying to like keep
I've done
funding
that,
or
and it's
anything.
horrible.
Right? No.
Like, it is
These people
brutal.
are like
Mhm.
making jokes about beer and stuff like you would in the show Friends. So I think it was a good idea. Also, I haven't read book 2 and 3, but I do think it was a good idea to have a group of people doing this instead of just one, like in the first book or in the Tencent version. I do think that was a good idea. I don't know that it was executed that well.
I agree. I don't think it was executed particularly well. The characters are, yes, there's a degree of believability about it. Now, you can make the justification that science has stopped, so a lot of their jobs have stopped. That's not true of Augie, though. So even though her job is stopped because she's sort of being tortured by the Sophons. So there's a little bit of sensibility in them. Well, we can't work now. Even though Jack should be able to work because he's making snacks. So I don't know why he's not back at
Well,
work.
he's independently wealthy, I think.
So yeah, I guess he's sold his company, so now he's just chilling, maybe. But yeah, that is a good point. They never go to work, though. When we meet them, to be fair, when we meet them, science has stopped, right? That's the idea, is that science has stopped making sense.
But they still should be doing something.
Yeah.
Or be stressed. I mean, like they don't even
Mm.
seem stressed about it.
Yeah.
None of them make any sense as people.
Mhm.
I don't believe any of those people were ever friends. Like
Mhm.
they all seem kind of jerks to each other. They
Mhm.
don't see, like, that's not how like 30, 40-year-old friends behave around each other. That's how like 20-year-olds who behave. It's I think it's like Can't Hardly Wait to the postgraduate years.
Yes,
This whole
exactly.
like this whole thing of like, I'm gonna tell the girl that I've had a crush on my whole life that I love her, like this weird puppy love thing. I'm like, you're like 40. Like, it's just, this is how 20-year-olds think their whole lives are going to be, and it's not. It's not. No one does this. So why are they acting like they're, I mean, they're supposed to be geniuses, and there's never even any indication that they're even remotely intelligent.
Yeah.
It suffers from what I said. It's almost, it's got the Good Will Hunting kind of problem, where it's like people just seem, like writers of this kind of thing, when they write a genius, they don't really know what to do with them. So they just write them as if they're like a normal person who just happens to have like superhuman powers. Like they can just look at things, it's like the Beautiful Mind kind of thing, where it's like, I just look at things at a bar and I put the pieces together and I can come up with Nobel Prize winning theories. But it's just lazy. It's just lazy writing of characters. That's the biggest criticism I have with the Netflix writing. It's lazy, and it does it left, right, and center. Like every trope that you could fall into to try to characterize someone, even if they're trying to build a real character, they do it lazily. The classic is when they have like the guy is it Saul? Oh, I don't remember which one. The one who becomes the wall facer at the end. Saul.
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 So he's apparently sleeps around with lots of women. Seems to cause zero problems, but apparently they gave him that character trait. But they have at one point, I think it's Augie, who's like, "What were you up to?" And he's like, "Nothing." And then she like pulls the hair off of him and she's like, "Ah, you clearly were sleeping with women." And I'm like, no one in the history of humankind has ever done that, because it makes no sense why you would find a hair on a person and assume that that means they're sleeping with people. Like, that's, no one does that, but that's the trope. So they just leaned into that. So it's like, you could have done something with it, but you chose not to. It was just everywhere they could take a lazy decision, they took it.
Yeah, and the writing mirrors that. The dialogue, rather.
I don't know how to fight. I don't know how to fight aliens. It's my favorite line.
Yeah, but and I don't mind cursing, but they curse so much, and it's in this like hip we're so cool kind of way. And and they do a lot of drugs. Like they're constantly getting high. They're constantly doing mushrooms or just smoking weed. Which again, I'm not a prude about that either. Fair enough. But they're doing that all the time, and it seems to be for relatability. Like we're supposed to, well, these are the cool scientists. They have the right opinions, and they're, they act in this cool way, and the smartest people in the room, and it'd be cool to like smoke dope, smoke a J with them. And he says when Saul, the thing that irritated me when Saul talks to the the head of the UN, and is like, they're coming in 400 years. Why don't we all smoke a J? And it's like, yeah, it's so cool. He said, smoke a J to the head of the UN. It has that kind of like hip swagger to it. Um, but as you said, Pat, like, these people don't make any sense as human beings, and they're also kind of endlessly whiny. Like they're either completely hip or just really the writers of the scripts just have them kind of preach a lot, and it's not necessarily on the actors, but it is a little grating after a while. And it's a shame because actually there's some opportunities for some kind of moral ambiguity that isn't necessarily there in the book. Like with the and actually you guys didn't see it, but in the Tencent episode where they destroy the ship, they eliminate the moral ambiguity in a hilarious way that I have to tell you about. But in the book, it's sort of, yeah, they have to destroy the ship because there's things in there, and there's one pilot who's going to get killed. They mention that, and it's a shame, but we have to break some eggs, sort of attitude. And in the show, even though I didn't like this, I think I saw where they were going with it, and I could see why you would make that decision. Is you have a bunch of kids on the ship in order to make it, like this is actually, you're actually harming innocent people in order to get this information. Now, I didn't like that they did it with children. That seems like you're kind of abusing the audience, but I at least get where they're going with it. In that instance.
Can we just go back, even in the book? So the plan is they're assuming there's what, a USB stick or a hard drive somewhere on the boat?
Yes, that's holding the Tri-Solarian communications.
And they did the math, and statistically they just don't think they're going to hit it with the nanofibers?
They say they can reconstruct it. The nanofiber is going to go through it, but they're so narrow that you could just put the chips back together.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
that's they do make that, they explain it in grave
I wondered
detail.
that too. I wondered how they planned to find after the entire ship exploded. And then they just had the Augie just wandering around this giant metal. I mean, like burning metal is usually wildly toxic, and yet they're all just wandering around. I mean, plot holes are not fun to point out. There are just so many.
Yeah. So but they screw that up because the ship scene ends up not making a lot of sense, and she ends up just kind of moping through the whole thing. So it gets kind of irritating to watch.
She mopes for like 2 episodes. Then they're like, well, we need her to actually go back and fix the sail thing because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Or have her go back for 1 episode, and because she's the only one, it's like. Good Augie hunting. She's the only one that can find this secret thing, so she has to go back.
How about them nano apples?
Yeah, and then she apparently decides she doesn't like the dude. I don't know why, but she doesn't like him anymore. And then she stomps away, and it was like, well, why did you even bother? I guess you've established her. She's the only one that can do this thing, and so she has to do it. And then you just be like, well, I wrote myself into a hole. I gotta back it out again. Like what?
Yeah, it's kind of very, very lazy ways of addressing moral ambiguity. Oh, and the Tencent show, what they do with the ship, it's great. So they have the one commander who I don't remember what his nationality is in the book. In the Tencent show, he's British, and they put on the ship.
There's an American in the book, I think. Isn't there American?
He might be American, yeah. There's an American there's a bunch of them in the show, and I don't remember which one is which. But anyway, he's like, so on that boat, there's a serial killing commando who killed my child. and there's a bunch of them. They're filled with these serial killers and pedophiles and commandos, and so don't worry about taking them out. These are the worst of the worst. And that's just it. They just introduce that, and then you cut to the boat right before it goes through the wires, and they're like hanging guys up by the neck, a la Apocalypse Now, and they're like, "Why are you doing this?" Because I want to see blood. And it just, there's no ambiguity. These people are evil. We have to kill them. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It was amazing. It was amazing.
So can we jump into the VR game a little bit?
Yes, let's
Okay.
talk about the VR game. Because I think that's something the show was also attempting to fix.
I agree. So I think in the book it made very little sense. Pat said it would make it like he would prefer the dossier instead of the VR game. Sure,
Especially because they're physicists. They can figure it out from the name of the game.
Level 1.
I got it.
But in the Netflix show, one thing that they do for the game, which I think helps a lot, is they introduce the little girl. So now there's stakes in the game, right? There's somebody to emotionally connect with. I'm not just saving a faceless society. I need to save this little girl. Really good idea. And then it's really funny. They have the detective say, there's a game, there's a little thing about a little girl. I think that's the only real game part in this. So they're also kind of like patting themselves on the back for coming up with making it a game. Yeah.
That sounds about right for these writers.
Yeah.
The game though was funny though. I love.
Yeah, it's a
was
little bit of
funny.
humor in there.
It was actually pretty good. Again, the Netflix series, the part that was legitimately good, I think, although they made one change that really ticks me off, but was the again back to the Cultural Revolution stuff. That stuff was actually worked pretty well. I liked, for the most part, I liked that. The game, I mean, it was a silly addition where they had like the whatever his name was, Sam from Game of Thrones, Jack.
Jack, yeah.
Jack, yep.
When they had Jack though, and I just love, because I mean it's just like this is exactly what everyone does in a game with NPCs, is he gets into the game and he just decks Thomas More in the face, and I just love the NPC kind of pops back up, looks angry, and then continues with this thing, and he just punches him again. I'm like, that's funny. That's what you would do in a video game like that. That's exactly what a person would do. That was funny. A good addition. Kudos to the writers on that one. That was good. I liked that.
So one of the things that confused me in the book was exactly how the dehydration worked. I had assumed somebody else had to dehydrate you. But in a show, you don't really have time to explain it either. In the Tencent version, the way it works is anybody can say, dehydrate me, and poof, you dehydrate. Like, that's how you do it. You just say that in, I mean, it's English, or I guess it's
Chinese.
Yeah, Mandarin or Cantonese. I'm assuming it's Mandarin in the show. But like, that's how it works in the game. And then I guess that suggests that's how it worked on the planet. They just, whatever their language was, they just had to say the words.
So funny because the detective goes into the game in the Tencent show, and
gets tricked by NPCs.
They trick him into saying dehydrate. They write the word on the ground.
I mean, that's really funny.
And you're like, what if you say that? And he's like, what do you mean, dehydrate? No, I died.
And he can't get back
really
in.
funny. Yeah. Can't get back in. Yeah.
Whereas it makes a little more sense in the Netflix show. I'm trying to remember. Like, you actually get dehydrated by the sun, right? The little girl steps out because there's only.
I think you have to will
it
though, right?
No, I don't think so, because they make her go out there because they're like hiding behind the rock, and then they have her go out there. But
no, okay. How do they dehydrate in the cold?
I was wondering that too. But...
Well, I don't think you need heat to dehydrate, right? This is just a moisture issue, not a temperature issue.
This is true. Cold dehydrates too. That's why fridges are very dry.
Very dry.
Fair enough.
And air conditioners, right? If you're in an air conditioned house, it's dry.
I said they cut one of my favorite. I was waiting for it. I was really hoping it was going to be there, because they cut out one of my favorite. It was one of the only things that was funny in the book. That was like when one of the characters gets rehydrated, he's like, "My hand! I lost my finger."
Yeah.
It's like,
they had that in the Tencent show.
The
yeah.
Tencent one.
oh,
Yeah.
I was like, that was funny. I was waiting for that, and I'm like, why did you cut that? That was funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they just wanted to have a giant naked bunch of people swimming around for a while for, again, some reason.
Yeah. So in the game, in the Netflix show, the thing they seemed to add to the game was the challenge was discovering why you're actually trying to solve the three-body problem, which is you're not trying to solve the three-body problem. You're trying to determine that they need to leave.
Oh, that's not in the book. I assumed that was in the book.
I don't think it's in the book, right? Or is
Well,
it,
I
I
Casey?
have no idea. As I said, I did not.
Didn't finish it. I didn't think it was in the book. No, I think it's just you're supposed to get so enamored with this world that you can't help but want to do everything in order to preserve it. Like it just becomes your reason for living.
well, no, and I think that's partially true, Tom. Right? That's what the Trisolarians want. They want our sympathy, and it's for whatever reason the Trisolarians, which they don't call them Trisolarians in the Netflix show audience. I forget what they call it in
It's the what they call them
Senti?
the
the
Senti.
senti, which is
So
the term used in the original. In the
okay,
Chinese, it's senti just means
so
like
I'll
three
try to remember
sons.
to say Senti in case you've only seen the show. But the Senti, I think what they're doing is trying to give us a history of their world and why it's okay that they're going to come share ours. I think that's part of the game is you're not going to solve the three body problem. This is a terrible way to solve the three body problem. But you trying makes it realize the struggle they've gone through throughout their entire history.
But why would anyone spend the time doing? I mean, like the game, even in the book, it was just like most people, I think, would just get in there and be like, "This makes no sense. This is like trying to. I mean, it's like trying to play ET on the Atari. It was you basically were like, I mean, I get I'm supposed to do something, but the game, the rules are so dumb, and there is absolutely no sense to any of my actions here. So I'm just gonna stop playing this. Like, I don't know why anyone would have been interested in it.
Yeah.
And at least in the Netflix series, it's because it's like, wow, it's this new technology that's like unavailable anywhere else on the planet. In the book, it's like, oh no, this is a normal thing. You put on your, your V suit and this is like, oh, there's tons of these games. This is just an insanely boring one of them.
Yeah, the Netflix improved that. It made it it's like it's also alien technology and it's supposed to be reading their minds, reading their cerebral data or something like that, in order to see who would be good for their ETO program, that type of thing. So they really buffed that up, and I think they improved that a lot. And it looks good. I think the sequences in game look
They look good,
pretty
yeah.
cool. Yeah. So I think that worked out well. Um, I do know one problem I also had with the adaptation in terms of characters is the big change that I think probably people are talking about who are fans of the books, which is moving all of the main characters into the first series, which the book doesn't do. And so we have the Brain Boy, which is the beginning of the third book, and then we have what was his name again? Brian, something boring, right?
Brain Boy?
Brain Boy. What's Brain Boy's name? Brain Boy with the weird crush. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. And then you have
Who would know his
Saul,
name?
who's yeah, Saul, who's basically the character from the second book and the
Will.
Wallfacer
Will
stuff.
Downing. Will
Will,
Downing.
yeah. Brain Boy. That I understand why they did that, and it's partially because Wang, the nanoscientist from the book, just has nothing going for him. He's not very interesting. He's just a normal guy. Um, so you have a community of people who have these kind of interpersonal problems, and there's potentially material there for conflict and what have you. The problem with that is the impression I got, because the interpersonal stuff is so kind of dull and cliched, is that they didn't trust the world they were building to reintroduce a new cast every season, which I think would have been a better choice. Is just, okay, we're going to have the Wallfacer people. Now, this is the plot of the Wallfacer people. We're going to meet a new cast. It's going to be the same world. Maybe we'll have some Easter egg or something like that, which usually I find annoying, but whatever could go into it. But I think this world that the Netflix show is building also just isn't that compelling. In latter books, the world becomes more interesting, just because there's certain social questions or whatnot that come up, and science fiction can do that well, even though it tends not to do characters quite as well. But I didn't find I wanted to return to this space either, to find out what's going to happen to this world, and not just because the characters are nothing like actual human beings, but because the system itself just isn't that interesting.
I think that's a big problem, but more in 2024 when this show's released and we're recording this, most seasons of a show, either on Netflix, HBO, the expectation is that's going to be a story, right? Season 1 of Stranger Things, it's a story. Season 1 of Game of Thrones, you can argue, is a story. In the Three Body Problem, what's the arc? What are we taking away? I'm okay with cliffhangers. I loved the new Spider-Man movie, Into the Spider-Verse, which, spoilers, ends on a cliffhanger. I loved it. Don't even need to make another one. Perfect. I'm looking forward to the next one, but end it there. That's fine. But the Three Body Problem introduces a whole new thing in the last episode was the first time we see the wall facers?
Yeah, I
It's
think
either the
it's
last episode, maybe the
I think it
last
is
two.
It's definitely the last episode. I think
And
it's
there's
Yeah.
no resolution to it.
Mhm.
There's nothing. And it's not even like, oh, well, maybe we'll understand what's going to happen to them in the next one. There's no breadcrumb trail. There's no. And what does that have to do with the staircase? What does that have to do with the numbers? What does that have to do with making the nano stuff? Like, none of it connects. There's no overarching.
Yeah, that's a really
plot.
good point. That's why you have different books. It's like, oh, well, here are different things humans are trying. And so you could have, we're in a new book where we're looking at a different government program that tries this thing. But in a show, it doesn't really connect.
I mean, is it just because I mean the whole staircase thing is not all that compelling? Like it's an interesting idea, fine. As I said, this is just where I get into the irritating thing where it's like the even when I even said when I said to my wife when we were watching it, I went, couldn't they? I go, they could easily just make like a solar parachute thing, like a solar sail, like that's a real thing. They can make a solar sail. I was like, and we've got nuclear bombs, like you can bomb the thing forward. I was like, they can get enough. Like I didn't know you needed 1,000 of them, but I'm like, I know that's an actual program from the 50s. There was an actual idea that we could just nuke a ship along. Like so, this is not but I said it was just lazy because then they have to make the whole thing with like there's like a bunch of scientists who would know that this is a thing and they all have to say no, it's completely crazy, that could never work. I'm like, no, you've had this idea before. So it's just kind of that bothered me, but it's not that compelling, and it's almost like I don't really care that much. Like it's also I don't know if it's just like it's a fascinating idea of like I have to fight a thing that's not going to happen for 400 years, but how do you get the stakes so that it isn't just like, well, we've got a lot of time. Like I know we have to get there, but we have 400 years. We can work on this problem as we go. We don't need to do this tomorrow. They're right. So there is that's part of the issue is that particular story isn't that compelling. The wall facer concept, when they got to that, I went, "Oh, that's a cool idea. Like you can make a story from this." But I'm like, you spent 4 episodes on the other thing that didn't do anything. And I don't mind if it failed, but at least have it maybe if you'd ended the season with that thing failing and then like something happening, again, a la Game of Thrones, where it's like whatever his name is gets killed at the end. Um, so maybe that could be you could have done something with that and then been like the next season will be the wall facers and then we're going to see how that plays out. But in this one, it just felt like there were so many dead ends, and yeah, it was like by the end of it, why why did we watch half of this? Like nothing really happened after the aliens showed up
Mhm.
or put their
Yeah.
giant eye in the sky. Which I also don't know why the aliens don't just make everyone go completely insane and kill each other, since they can apparently cause us to have hallucinations on a planet-wide scale. Why are they bothering? Why don't they just make everyone go crazy and kill themselves? I don't know why they didn't do that, but
Yeah. Uh, in the book, it ends with them going out to the fields to see the bugs, and it's a locust infestation. That's
Oh,
when
hang on. I'm going to interrupt you, Tom, because in the show, they're in Florida, right?
they're in England, right? No, they're in
No, they went
Florida,
to
right?
Florida.
Because
They're
they
in
have
Florida,
to go to yeah.
and the detective from England's like, "Follow me. I know a great spot with a bunch of dragonflies or something."
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
then
point.
goes,
That's really good.
See? You could have just said, "There's tons of
That's what
bugs
I
here."
said. I go, why couldn't you just put a YouTube video on it? I go, just put on a YouTube video. Or just say, do you know what cicadas are? Like, I did not need you to drive me out to the swamp. Like, it's where, why?
They could have just made an elaborate VR game that explained that bugs were still around.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
You can
no, no.
keep
It's a good interruption. It's a good point.
That's
Um,
real. I didn't even think about
yeah, I
that
didn't
one.
think
I
of
thought about why don't you just show them a YouTube video? I didn't think about the fact that he's never been here.
Uh, in the book, he drives to his hometown where there's a locust problem. Which again, I guess they didn't have to drive there, but he's trying to nail down a point, which is blah blah blah. But it's a good ending because it's just like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a
that was
good like
effective. It was
there's
fine.
yeah, yeah, bugs can fight back, which is um, the characters he's talking to are very compelling. They're just kind of getting drunk and
I don't
yelling,
even
"We are
remember
bugs."
which ones there were.
Oh.
Like, I don't even remember which characters he brought there. That's how well developed they are. I can't remember which ones were there.
It was in the show. It was Saul and what's her name? Who's the New Zealand woman who
The one that Brain
does
Guy
the
was in
sound?
love with?
Yeah.
Yeah, the staircase lady.
Oh gosh, what was
These
her
are
name?
great characters, audience. We can't remember who's in what scene, what their names are.
Point. I'm like, they were so
Yeah.
interchangeable. You could have had that exact, but you couldn't have had a different scene than the detective. Liked him. He's
Mhm.
great. He was fun. But you could have just taken basically any of the other characters. You could have just put Brain Guy in that scene, and I would have believed it. Like, you could have had him go out there with any of those people that have been in that whole thing, and it wouldn't have mattered. Any
Yeah.
of them could have gone, and it would have made no difference.
Mhm. Yeah. And some of the changes. So Brain Guy is based on a character in the third book who's a really weird character, and he's only, it, well, I will only talk about the stuff in the third book that is the same in the Netflix show. But in the third book, he is like really, really, really socially awkward to the point where there seems to be something wrong with him, not necessarily in terms of cognitive processing, but he can't relate to people. And part of it was his parents brought him up in a somewhat pseudo abusive way. So he's just completely alienated. And he's just in love with this
Why didn't they do that in the show?
yeah, and he's just in love with this one random woman who was nice to him in undergrad, as an undergrad.
Which is
He's just
brilliant. Why
yeah,
did they do that?
and so when he ends up getting similarly, he ends up getting cancer, and she kind of recruits him into
I
this.
would have felt so bad. Like, that would have
Yeah,
been heartbreaking.
mm,
That makes sense.
mhm. And it's great because like this idea of well, no one actually has loved me is really true, and in the it's one of the things that doesn't make any sense in the show, but seems to make more sense in the book is a sister comes and is like, listen, we want to buy a house. If you keep getting cancer treatment, you're going to drain our father's account, and then we can't buy a house with that inheritance. So can you just commit suicide now? Can you just do euthanasia? And he's
Again, also brutal and really real. Why didn't they
Mhm.
do that?
Yeah, and well, they do the sister, but it doesn't make any sense in the
This just
show.
made no sense. I'm like,
Yeah,
why is this here?
she's like, well, I need to buy a house, so you need to commit suicide so that we can get the savings from your parents. And it's kind of like, he's gonna die in 2 months. Why would you say that? What is he gonna spend the money on in the hospital room? In
Star.
a star,
A
yes.
star.
Which is also in the book. But in the book though, the person who gets the star really likes it. Like she's really excited about it and really happy, which I liked a lot more than oh, it's just a piece of paper. But regardless,
Because they're
yes,
cynical. They're
yeah, they're
realistic
so
and cynical, and they
cynical.
know the world.
But I like that was it's a really interesting character and stuff happens in the third book involving him, but he's just like this really odd alienated person, and the character Saul is based on is also kind of interesting, though I don't really buy it. I know what he's going for, but I don't buy it with that character. He's a guy who's a scientist, but he's kind of lazy, so he hasn't really been that successful, and he sleeps around with women as Saul does. And he at one point had a real relationship with someone, but he became but the woman was like, for a gift I want you to write me a novel, which sounds like a horrible thing to ask somebody to do. But he ends up becoming he tries to create a character, and he ends up becoming obsessed with this character he invents, and sort of falls in love with this character for this book he's writing. um and when he becomes a wall facer, basically he's like, I don't know why I'm a wall facer. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't want to do this. And what he does is he starts going like, because the idea of the wall facer project is you
Well,
get whatever
before,
you ask for.
so is that going
This
to
is
be
in the
in?
show.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. But in the it's a small detail at the beginning of the second book. But basically in the show, it's like you can't say I'm not a wall facer anymore and be believed because everything's just going on in your head. So basically you just get whatever you want. And so this guy's just like, all right, I'm for the wall facer program and humanity, I need a really nice house. And then he's like, I saw really good bourbon online. I need it for the wall facer program. And he's just an ass. And he just ends up going like, all right, I made up this woman. I need you to find somebody just like her and bring her to me. So for the program, and it's great. You like watching the guy because he's kind of he's got kind of a sleaze, but he's also kind of charming. And so it's just it's a really interesting kind of thing to watch. The stuff with like the believable character he creates is sort of a little eye rolly, but it's a far more interesting character design than Saul, the guy who just kind of sleeps around and does shrooms because he's very cool. Um, so those character changes are, yeah, sort of unfortunate. Because they stop making sense in the context of the show. And I don't like what they did with the female scientist. Her as an older woman, um, I didn't really like that character very much. What they do with her is they do this thing which you see very often. I think it's a Western thing. I'm not entirely sure. Is in order to show that she's somebody who's independent and likable, is they make her sassy. Like she's just very, very sassy and she kind of just speaks her mind and whatnot. And it seems like she's from an entirely different universe than the character we meet in the book, who is, still a person who overcomes a lot and is incredibly important and strong or whatnot. But she's not this like talking back smart aleck grandma. I couldn't stand that. I thought that was the most irritating thing. Um, I hated that change, though. I liked her in the the Cultural Revolution stuff.
Yeah, that
Though-
actress was good. I like that
yeah,
actress actually.
yeah. The younger actress, I liked her, though. I don't know why she had to sleep with the bird, not the tree guy. He's not the bird guy. The tree guy, and the bird guy. She also sleeps with the bird guy. She sleeps with Evans also.
Yeah, I mean the thing with the tree guy really irritated me, if only because again it was just an example of lazy writing. Because and it also was writing that was important because they changed something fundamental. So A, this was just again the lazy writing thing because I thought when they have her get caught with the book, why is he even there? Like they have him standing behind the two guards when they found the book and then he's standing behind them. I'm like, the only reason he's there is so he can give puppy eyes at her so she doesn't turn him in. There is no one would know that he gave her the book. There's no way they could know it in the Netflix series. Why is he there? He has no function. So that was just poor writing. They just wanted him to be there. You could have come up with a reason why he's there, but you didn't do it. But the whole thing is that the important thing I thought about it was that in the book, the whole point is that she asks him he's writing a letter about, the deforestation based on Silent Spring because he's upset about the deforestation. She volunteers to write the letter for him because his hands are hurting from working the chainsaw all day and it's all wobbly. So she says, I'll write it for you. So he dictates it, she writes it, he mails it. Then he gets in trouble and says, I didn't write it, she wrote it and told me to mail it. So the whole point is he betrays her and throws her under the bus. She then basically is like, well, there's no point in my doing anything because if I argue it back, well, then they're not going to believe me. So I might as well just go my merry way. So the whole thing is she's not making a sacrificial she's not sacrificing herself for him. He betrays her. But and so that feeds more into this whole thing of her like sort of betrayal mindset. But instead in the Netflix series she doesn't do that. She gets to be the noble person by not turning him in and saying no, he gave me the book. So it's actually like a somewhat fundamentally important change, and they could have fit it all in there if they just hadn't done the sex scene. Like you didn't need him to sleep. Like that's not in the book. There's no need for her to sleep with him. You could have used the time you spent on that to actually do the proper character development. And instead you just were like, let's have a sex scene. Like Like, I don't mind, you can have a sex scene in movies and TV shows. That's fine as long as it does something other than just be like, "Hey, I don't really know what to do with them. We need to show they're important to each other. Just have them sleep together. That's easy." Like, it was again just another lazy writing thing. But it was, it was that sort of thing where they should have they could have made it the actual scene and have it be important, and they didn't. They took the easy route for some reason. I don't know why they did. So if she doesn't sleep, so she doesn't sleep with Evans in the book,
No, the father of
then
her
who's the
child.
dad?
It's another character they left out. Who's fine. They leave it out. He's not that interesting. But when she's on the base, there's these two guys. Actually, he actually is in the show. He's the guy she kind of he. I think he's the guy who.
Steals her son idea.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's the guy who steals the sun idea or the guy who's more senior, because there's two of them, and one of them she ends up marrying and having a kid with, and then what she ends up killing him. At one point, she sends the message, and the senior guy and the sun stealer is sun is they have to fix something on the she breaks something and they have to fix it, but they have to, in order to get to it, climb down the mountain on a cord, sort of something a mountain climber would use. And she just wants to kill the more senior guy because he's going to realize she sent the message back. But her husband is like, "Oh no, I'll help you," and he goes down to help him, and she's like, "Oh crap, this is my one opportunity to do this." And so she's like, I got to do it." And so she ends up cutting the cord and killing both of them, um, which is, yeah, somewhat interesting. It's sort of underwritten, like we just sort of glaze over it, even though it's pretty profound. But it probably could have worked well on film.
So, can we talk about her sending the message?
We can.
All
That's
right, all
possible.
right. So, you guys have seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And there's a scene with the curtains, the guy that's locked up in the tower, and he also writes a message. And while he's writing it, he's making sure the guards aren't upset that he's writing it. Can you guys picture the scene?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I swear they did the same thing in this Netflix show. She keeps looking over at the cards as she's about to hit the numbers. I really want to cut those two scenes together. It felt very Monty Python as like, I'm doing a naughty thing, telling the aliens where I am.
Well, Tom pointed out that the wall facer is very much is from Life of Brian.
Yo.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not a wall facer. I'm not a wall facer.
He's a wall facer.
A wall true wall facer would say that he's not a
Not a
wall
wall facer. All right,
not
I
a
am a
wall
wall facer.
He's a very
said
naughty
he's a
wall
wall
facer.
My wife, the other one of my favorite. My wife was, we knew it wasn't going very well. When in the very first scene, we're already Mystery Science Theater 3000ing it. But when the daughter goes and kills herself and throws her off the thing there, my wife goes, "Is she diving into Scrooge McDuck's money bin?"
Oh God, this poor show.
It gets back to my fundamental problem with a lot of these things. It's when, like, if we go back to like Mario Brothers, like the 90s Mario Brothers one, like that was a bad, but it was like it was just incompetent, and it wasn't it was a disaster. Like, it was an incompetent disaster. But it wasn't like pretentious, it wasn't like preachy, it wasn't lazy, it was just bad. Like, it was poorly executed. There was a lot of flaws with it. The Netflix series just bugs me because it has every resource. It clearly has people who kind of know what they're doing in part of the execution of it, but the writing is so lazy and a lot of the acting is so bad that it's just like, and it's so pretentious. It wants to be so smart and tell me what to think about stuff. And I'm like, just stop. That's what irritates me more than anything. It's like Gone in, what was it? No, not Gone in 60 Seconds. What was the Fast and the Furious? Like, that's a bad movie, but it's fun. Like, it's not trying to teach me anything. It's not trying to do anything. It's competently executed and it's, fine. But it's the fact that it's so pretentious and it wants me to think about stuff that's just, and it irritates me when it when it tries to do that and it does it poorly and lazily.
So, audience, look forward to our Super Mario Brothers episode coming out later this season. Don't worry, I don't think we just mock it the whole time. I think at least some of us had a little bit of love for it. Maybe. Stay tuned. You'll find out.
I had fun with it. I did.
Yeah. Oh Lord. So is this a bigger problem with science fiction for you guys? This sort of idea of we're kind of having to come up with something to think about or tell people how to think, but we're not always necessarily creating the best characters or what have you, or even
1984 does it.
Mhm.
Uh, Brave New World not quite as well, but Brave New World does it.
Mhm.
Even Handmaid's Tale. I don't really like Handmaid's Tale that much, but that does it. I think Handmaid's Tale actually kind of
Mhm.
pulls it off. And I mean, that's not it's sci-fi, right? Handmaid's Tale
Yeah,
sci-fi.
I think
It's
Handmaid's Tale is
dystopian. It's more
sci-fi.
dystopian, I guess, than sci-fi. It's not really
Yeah,
doing
which I
any
think is
science with it.
yeah, it's a
But I guess
species of
yeah,
science
and I guess in
fiction.
both of those instances, though, they're more. Are they really truly? I mean, they are sci-fi, but is it more just like we're going to take our own world and translate it into another world and see how it functions?
Yeah, I think maybe it's I get the impression with Handmaiden's Tale that
Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale, sorry, that they're jumping into, or Margaret Atwood is looking at the concept of speculative fiction as a means of sounding off or allowing herself to do something new with serious fiction. She's sort of like a tourist of science fiction, which is fine. I mean,
Which is
I'm
fine.
not.
I don't mind
Yeah,
that
I'm
at
not.
all. Yeah.
That's not a criticism, even if it sounds like one.
I mean, Aldous Huxley doesn't. He doesn't really do sci-fi other than Brave New World. I don't think.
No, he's more of a political writer,
Yeah, that's what I mean. So
and so is Orwell.
yeah,
And I think that's then maybe the big difference. I think of Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut is definitely doing sci-fi, and he's doing really interesting things with it. In part because he's taking aim at stuff. He's able to make points through humor and through kind of outrageous things. I think that works very well. I haven't read enough Philip K. Dick, but Philip K. Dick seems to be somebody who's doing something a little different with science fiction. Just because he doesn't seem to really be caught up in the soft or the hard. And I'm going to explain every little detail. Nor is he just kind of space operaing it, where another cool star fight is going on. He seems to have these kind of interesting little ironies that can be very compelling. I mean, there's one in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which got adapted into Blade Runner, obviously, which isn't in the movie, but there's this religious figure named Mercer, who's a sort of a Christ figure in that world. And there's this television host who's sort of this world's version of an atheist, who wants to disprove Mercer exists. And he basically does. He's like, we found out about this guy Mercer. He lives in a trailer park. He's a con artist, blah, blah, blah. And later in the book, the main character has a miraculous vision of Mercer. And Mercer's telling him things. And he's like, I saw in the news that you're not real. You're just some guy. And he's like, yeah, that was true. And then the vision vanishes. And it's just this really like ironic thing of like a vision that's proving itself is stating that it itself is not real. There's like cool little moments like that sometimes become possible in science fiction and in Philip K. Dick. And I think that's kind of what's interesting. Or the favorite one I liked was Count Zero, which is it's the sequel to Neuromancer. I mean, Neuromancer's fine, but it's sort of a little in love with itself. Count Zero is a really interesting science fiction one that actually has a lot to do with why we find abstract art interesting. That seems to be what the book is about. It's about like Joseph Cornell boxes, and it's a very odd way of exploring these ideas. So those I like, but a lot of science fiction I often find I get either a space opera, which can be exciting if it's well done, or I get someone who comes out with like a diatribe about this, that, or this philosophy, I would rather just read the philosopher. It's usually a little more cogent and thought out. And that tends to be my problem. I think they adapt well. I think science fiction can adapt well and often can be very exciting, though, if you're doing more of the kind of soft thing.
Well, speaking of adaptations, I think we've had our say about these as individual works. How do we feel about the Netflix show as an adaptation of the book? Did they do anything right? Did they do anything wrong? Not
They
necessarily is it good,
they
is it bad, but how is
Again,
the
the
actual
Cultural Revolution stuff
adaptation?
worked. The
is
Cultural Revolution stuff was pretty good. That
Mhm.
was compelling. I thought, but I mean, they didn't really. They just sort of filmed it. They didn't
Mhm.
really. They
Right?
didn't
That was
really.
almost a one-to-one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
more
Which,
pretty
or
one to
okay,
less.
one. They didn't have to
great,
do too much.
good.
It
Yep.
worked pretty well.
The game works better in the show, and
Right? That was the good adaptation choices
and
there. Yep.
I don't think you can have Wang as your main character.
I think the Tencent show
The Tencent
shows
has
that.
him. Yeah.
Oh, but it is. Yeah, it's audience, a Tencent one. If you want to go check it out, it's on Prime Video right now.
I liked it more than the Netflix one. I'll
Oh
say this.
no! I couldn't. I did not get through it. It felt like they were being paid by the minute. It is so slow. In
Really slow. It's a
oh
police
my
procedural.
gosh.
It's made like NCIS China. That's what it
Yeah.
feels like.
It takes 3 or 4 episodes until you start seeing the numbers. Where in the Netflix show, it's like 8 minutes. So one thing I'm gonna give the Netflix show credit for is they're moving McGroovin. Like at least you don't have to spend as long with it. I mean, they don't. They might be trying to get too much into this 8-episode series, or they're not. Again, I don't think there's an arc in that 8-episode series.
Yeah, that's the
I don't
big
think they
problem.
Big
trusted it.
mistake
I don't
did it.
think they
Yep.
trusted it. I think they were just kind of just cram as many concepts and things and hope people latch onto something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
guess in that way, is it a poor adaptation then?
Yeah, I think if it fails to work as an independent work, or it fails to work in dialogue with anything else, then it hasn't succeeded. I mean, I don't think any of us enjoyed it. It seems like I haven't read the reviews, but what would they like? I mean, fans of the book are not going to like it because they change too much. And then normies who haven't read the book are probably not going to like it for the reasons we have. So I just normies are not going to like it for the reason that we have. So, I don't think it my God, there's so many things going wrong.
It's the Santee
Yeah.
who
They wanted
can
the
cause
adaptation
every
to
single
work.
computer to change and cause hallucinations, and yet they've spent their time putting an eye in the sky.
This is
Yeah.
their adaptation. This they thought was a better version of their history
Yeah.
and their.
Yeah, but I don't think it works. And I think that what's being adapted then is some concepts that people really like. There's a huge fan base for these books. I think they're Hugo Award winners, which is sort of fan sourced, I believe, in the science fiction awards. They're immensely popular. People will say this is their favorite science fiction series. I don't know what your wife thinks about it, Pat.
It's funny because I bought the book. I bought it for her years ago for her birthday or for Christmas or something. I remember seeing it at because my wife really likes sci-fi, so I was at the bookstore and they had those books out, and I thought, oh, it looks interesting. I'll get this for her. She liked them, but I mean, again, she sort of was like, yeah, they were fun, and even when we watched it, I was like, oh, is this in the book? And she basically was like, I can't remember. And granted, she probably read them now like 8 years ago, but she was very much like, I don't really remember them that well. They didn't stand out, I don't think, that much in her mind. But
Yeah.
she did read all 3, and I only bought her the first one, and she got the other one, so she did read them all. So she clearly enjoyed them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read all 3 too. So you do want to see what happens and where it goes. And
No, I don't.
I was kind of curious with the
You said
Trisolarans.
you want to see.
Oh yes, sorry.
You said you want
One-
to see, and I said
one
no, I don't.
Hypothetically could want to see like what these creatures look like or what happens when they get there. But yeah, I don't think this is successful as an adaptation. I think the Tencent one, the Chinese show, was far more entertaining. It takes a little while and it's painfully slow. It's incredibly slow, but it doesn't take itself that seriously. It's far more comic. It's having fun in the scenes, even when they don't work.
The detective is so much fun in that show. Actually,
He's playing basically a broad comic character. So he's somewhere between Benedict Wong's Dasha and the book's Dasha.
But like that could have been an interesting idea. Like if you really wanted to adapt it, take the character who's really interesting in it, and turn it into essentially a mystery story where it's this guy has to figure out what this thing is. And that could be the first season. If the whole first season is just him going around, and again, how you could have the exact same setup. Like, this is just writing. If I was going to write this exactly the same, fine, take the whole thing, split them up into 5 different characters, whatever you want to do, bring them all in. But he's trying to go around and figure it out. And it becomes essentially almost like a Blade Runner noir kind of mystery science fiction thing. And that's the whole first season. And the first season, that's the arc, and the season sort of ends with him figuring out and putting all of it together and seeing, and that's the big reveal for the audience is, oh my gosh, aliens are invading. Like, that's a season. That's a cogent season with a really good arc. You can do all of your other characters, you can make something really interesting, and you can phase him out later in the next season and have it be all about the other characters, but you've built a whole thing, you've got really interesting characters. Like, that's good, right? And it's hard. That would be really, really hard to write. You can't, you would not be able to fall back on all the tropes, but that's a successful season. That would be a successful adaptation. This thing wasn't, because it just made Dawson's Creek and, you know,
Dawson's Creek meets Blade Runner
I don't even
in
know. I've
England.
run out of analogies. I've run out of things to
The
just...
Three Creek problem.
I still said I'm waiting for my line in the next season, and the detective is going to say to Saul, and he's going to say, "You better get your head out of your ass, or I'm going to shove your face through that wall facer." I'm waiting for it. It's going to be great. That's the quality of dialogue I've come to expect.
So with that line, I think we can pour a drink on the ground for this show and its creators and this novel and call it an evening. I hope you enjoyed Adaptation. I hope you avoid the 3-body problem in any of its forms, and we will see you next week. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and look at the 2 films from 1971 and 2005.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory from 1964 and see how well it adapted into Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory from 1971 and 2005. Pat, what was your favorite adaptation?
I mean, I'm going to go with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I'm going to go with the Gene Wilder one. I'm sure we'll get into the newer one as well. It's the newer one the newer one is technically more faithful to the book in that it has more things from the book, but I don't think it's actually more faithful. And I think as a movie, it doesn't stand as well. But I'm sure we'll get into that next week.
KJ, what do you think?
So yeah, I mean, between the 2 movies, absolutely Gene Wilder over Johnny Depp. But have you guys played any like the Lego Star Wars, Lego Batman, Lego Indiana Jones, Lego?
No,
Have you played these?
I haven't played.
I know of their
Lego
existence,
anything.
but I have not played them.
I know Lego Batman was a thing. I don't know.
There was
Lego
actually
Indiana
a movie
Jones
on that one. Yeah, so Lego, the company, is kind of like Oreo, right? They're killing it with all their variations of whatever they're doing. And one of the things they do is they make video games that are generally two-player co-op. You can't really die. When you die, the pieces just come back together. They're just fun to play through. And you're playing through classics like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, maybe. I don't know. Hogwarts,
Yeah, they definitely did Harry Potter. Yeah.
Harry Potter.
Hmm.
Yep. And between the levels, they have cutscenes that are basically the scenes from the movies with Legos and are making the jokes you'd find on the internet anyway, and they're wonderful. So I would love it if there was a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory Lego made game with the cutscenes in between. I could play as an Oompa Loompa, maybe. Like it would just be a lot of fun. So doesn't exist, but the Lego Charlie and the Chocolate Factory game would be my favorite adaptation, I think.
I hope the people at Lego listen to this episode and develop this video game.
Yeah, give me a call. Give me a call. I can get them set up.
Yeah, work
Mr.
with
Lego.
KJ, and then we could do another podcast on adaptation of
Into
Willy
Lego.
Wonka into Lego.
How about you, Tom? What was your favorite adaptation?
Yeah, I think the Gene Wilder one is better than the God, what's the Tim Burton one. I mean, the Tim Burton one, yes, it is plotted more similarly to the book, and there is some stuff they invent, which is probably the best stuff in the movie. Is the stuff with Christopher Lee, I think, is the best part of that film, even though there isn't a tremendous amount of it. But I'm not the biggest fan of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the movie. I actually don't like the musical numbers very much. I think they're kind of flat, even though the melodies are memorable. But Gene Wilder is so interesting and so much fun to watch in this movie. He's, like this like crazy sort of sarcastic poet. Like I didn't realize how much poetry comes out, like famous lines of poetry come out of his mouth throughout the whole of this movie. And I'd forgotten about that entirely. I don't know how long it's been since I've last seen it. And I was expecting to go in and not like it very much. And I just find Gene Wilder kind of fascinating to watch. And so I think that's why. Well, with Johnny Depp, he was playing like a prepubescent adult, I think. I think that was the concept of the character that he was going in for, which is they tell you when you're training to be an actor, which is something Pat and I both did, that you need to make choices when you're an actor. And Johnny Depp made some choices, and we will say that for him.
The problem is, yes, but the director is supposed to edit those choices and tell you when you make a bad choice. I think that is one of the great things that directors are supposed to do. I don't think anybody told Johnny no.
Yes. Yeah, it seems like nobody has told Johnny no in some time, but yeah. I agree. I think that was probably less of a collaboration than it should have been, but we will talk about all of this next week.